Tonight, we embark on a journey that will shatter everything you believe about human history. What if I told you that our entire understanding of civilization is built on a foundation of carefully constructed lies? That the story of humanity rising from primitive hunters to modern society is not just incomplete, but deliberately misleading? The truth is far more extraordinary and terrifying than any textbook dares to reveal. We are not the first advanced civilization to walk this earth. We are the seventh, and the evidence of the six that came before us has been systematically hidden, buried, and erased from our collective memory. Before we descend into this rabbit hole of forbidden knowledge, let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time keeps you company in the darkness. The visuals you see are simply companions to guide your imagination, but they're not essential for this journey into the shadows of our past. The first crack in the official narrative appears when you examine the archaeological record with fresh eyes. Across the globe, researchers have uncovered artifacts that shouldn't exist according to our accepted timeline. Deep within coal seams formed millions of years ago, miners have discovered perfectly crafted metal objects. Inside ancient rock formations, workers have found tools made from metals so pure that our modern technology struggles to replicate them. These discoveries don't fit the neat progression we've been taught. They suggest that someone, somewhere, possessed advanced metallurgical knowledge long before humanity was supposed to exist. Yet these artifacts rarely make headlines. They're quietly catalogued, then mysteriously disappear into storage facilities where they gather dust and silence. The pattern becomes even more disturbing when you realize how consistently these discoveries vanish. Research papers are retracted without explanation. Archaeological sites suddenly become restricted zones. Scientists who dare to question the established timeline find their funding mysteriously cut and their careers derailed. This isn't incompetence or coincidence. This is systematic suppression of evidence that threatens the very foundation of our historical narrative. But the artifacts are just the beginning. Beneath our oceans lie structures that defy every explanation mainstream archaeology offers. Sonar sweeps reveal perfectly geometric formations on the seafloor, massive stone blocks arranged in patterns that nature could never create. These aren't random rocks scattered by currents. They're the remnants of cities, harbours, and monuments built when these areas were dry land. Off the coast of Japan, divers explore terraced platforms carved with mathematical precision. Near India's coastline, underwater archaeologists map the foundations of cities described in ancient texts that were dismissed as mythology. In the Caribbean, researchers document stone roads and architectural complexes lying beneath hundreds of feet of water. The implications are staggering. If these structures existed before the last ice age ended, if they were built when sea levels were dramatically lower, then human civilization is far older than we've been told. These underwater ruins don't represent failed coastal settlements. They represent entire civilizations swallowed by rising seas when the world's climate shifted catastrophically. The official response to these discoveries follows a predictable pattern. First, denial. Then, when the evidence becomes undeniable, reframing. These structures are dismissed as natural formations despite their obvious artificial geometry. Access to the most promising sites becomes mysteriously restricted. Research permits are denied without adequate explanation. Why would anyone want to hide evidence of ancient advanced civilizations? The answer lies in what that evidence implies about our own future. Every culture on Earth preserves memories of a great catastrophe that reset the world. The flood myths aren't isolated stories from primitive peoples trying to explain natural disasters. They're fragments of historical memory, passed down through thousands of years describing real events that nearly erased humanity from the planet. These stories share remarkable consistency across cultures that had no contact with each other. They describe darkness that lasted for years, skies that change colour, and waters that rose to swallow entire continents. They speak of survivors fleeing to mountains and building boats to escape the devastation. Most importantly, they describe a world that existed before the catastrophe, a world of great cities and advanced knowledge that vanished in an instant. Modern geology confirms that such catastrophic events have occurred repeatedly throughout Earth's history. Ice cores reveal layers of volcanic ash that blanketed the planet. Sediment samples show evidence of massive floods that reshaped coastlines. Climate data indicates sudden temperature shifts that would have devastated any existing civilizations. The pattern suggests that Earth operates on cycles of stability and chaos. Civilizations rise during stable periods, developing technology and culture over thousands of years. Then, with shocking suddenness, natural forces reset the planet. Ice sheets collapse, seas rise, volcanoes erupt, and the climate shifts so dramatically that complex societies simply cannot survive. Only scattered groups of survivors make it through these resets, carrying fragments of knowledge from the lost world. They rebuild what they can remember, but much is lost in the transition. The new civilization that eventually emerges believes it is the first, unaware that it stands on the ruins of previous ages. This cyclical view of history explains many puzzles that mainstream archaeology struggles to address. Why do the oldest megalithic structures show the highest levels of precision and sophistication? Why do ancient calendars demonstrate astronomical knowledge that supposedly didn't exist for thousands of years? Why do cultures around the world share similar architectural techniques, despite being separated by oceans? The answer is inheritance. Each civilization doesn't start from scratch. It builds upon the scattered remnants of what came before, imitating techniques it doesn't fully understand, copying designs from fragments of older structures. The most advanced genetic research is now revealing another layer to this mystery. Hidden within human DNA are markers that tell a story of repeated population bottlenecks, moments when our species was reduced to tiny surviving groups. These genetic signatures don't match the gradual expansion mainstream anthropology describes. They match sudden, catastrophic reductions in population, followed by rapid expansion from isolated refugia. Even more intriguingly, certain rare genetic clusters appear in populations that have no obvious connection to each other. These clusters include enhanced resistance to environmental stress, improved spatial navigation abilities, and heightened activity in brain regions associated with inherited memory patterns. It's as if some humans carry genetic adaptations specifically designed for surviving civilizational collapse. These genetic signatures are becoming more active in recent generations, as if environmental conditions are beginning to resemble those that originally shaped them. Rising carbon dioxide levels, shifting magnetic fields, and changing climate patterns may be awakening dormant survival mechanisms encoded in our DNA thousands of years ago. The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity. If humanity has risen and fallen 6 times before, if each civilization reached heights similar to, or beyond our own before vanishing, then our modern world is not unique. We are not the pinnacle of human achievement. We are simply the latest iteration in a cycle that has repeated throughout history. More unsettling still, if this pattern holds true, then we may be approaching our own reset. The same forces that erased previous civilizations, sea level rise, climate instability, volcanic activity, magnetic field fluctuations, are showing increased activity in our current era. The signs that preceded earlier collapses are manifesting again, not over centuries but over decades. This knowledge carries profound implications for how we understand our place in the cosmic timeline. Are we building toward an unprecedented future, or are we unconsciously preparing for another cycle of collapse and renewal? The answer may determine whether the eighth civilization will be the first to break the pattern, or simply another layer in Earth's archaeological record. The evidence continues to accumulate despite efforts to suppress it. Each discovery adds another piece to a puzzle that reveals humanity's true age and cyclical nature. The question is no longer whether previous advanced civilizations existed, but how much knowledge we can recover before our own cycle reaches its inevitable conclusion. The deeper we excavate into Earth's buried secrets, the more we discover that our planet itself has been keeping a meticulous record of these lost ages. While institutions work tirelessly to suppress individual discoveries, they cannot silence the testimony of the rocks themselves. Geological evidence speaks in a language that transcends human manipulation, and its message is clear. Catastrophic resets have reshaped our world repeatedly throughout the deep past. Consider the anomalous sediment layers found across multiple continents. These thin bands of material appear in geological strata at precisely the times when advanced civilizations would have faced extinction. They contain microscopic spherules of melted rock, rare earth elements in concentrations that suggest cosmic impacts, and isotopic signatures that point to massive volcanic events. These aren't gradual changes accumulated over millennia. They represent sudden planet-wide catastrophes that occurred within human timeframes. What makes these layers particularly significant is their global distribution and synchronous timing. The same signatures appear in ice cores from Greenland, marine sediments from the Pacific, and cave deposits from South America. This level of correlation across diverse environments indicates events so massive they affected the entire planetary system simultaneously. The timing of these catastrophic markers aligns disturbingly well with gaps in the archaeological record. Periods when human activity seems to vanish from large regions of the globe, only to reappear centuries later with mysteriously advanced capabilities. These aren't temporary setbacks in human development. They represent complete civilizational discontinuities, moments when the accumulated knowledge of thousands of years simply evaporated. Between these extinction markers, however, lies evidence of remarkable sophistication. Microscopic analysis of ancient materials reveals manufacturing techniques that shouldn't have existed in their supposed time periods. Crystalline structures in ancient metals show signs of precision heating and cooling that requires advanced furnace technology. Stone surfaces display tool marks consistent with diamond-tipped cutting instruments. Ceramic fragments contain composite materials that modern science has only recently learned to produce. These technological signatures don't appear gradually in the record. They emerge suddenly, persist for varying lengths of time, then disappear completely. The pattern suggests not slow technological development, but rapid deployment of inherited knowledge, followed by its equally rapid loss during catastrophic events. Perhaps most revealing are the astronomical alignments embedded in structures worldwide. These aren't simple solar or lunar observations that any agricultural society might develop. They track the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle that requires centuries of continuous observation to detect. They predict eclipses with mathematical precision that demands sophisticated understanding of orbital mechanics. They encode knowledge of stellar positions that would only be visible during specific epochs thousands of years apart. The builders of these monuments weren't just watching the sky casually. They possessed inherited astronomical knowledge spanning multiple precessional cycles. This suggests observation and record-keeping traditions that stretched across tens of thousands of years, far exceeding the supposed age of human civilization. But who were these astronomers? The genetic evidence provides tantalizing clues. Deep analysis of mitochondrial DNA reveals population lineages that trace back to small founder groups that survived during periods of severe environmental stress. These genetic bottlenecks correspond precisely with the catastrophic markers in the geological record. More intriguingly, certain genetic variants associated with enhanced cognitive abilities appear clustered in populations whose oral traditions preserve the most detailed flood memories. These aren't random mutations that arose independently. They represent carefully preserved genetic advantages that helped specific groups survive civilizational collapse. The distribution of these genetic markers tells a story of strategic survival. They appear most frequently in populations that traditionally lived at high altitudes, in geologically stable regions, or in areas with reliable water sources during climate extremes. These weren't random survivors stumbling through catastrophe. They were prepared groups who understood what was coming and positioned themselves accordingly. This preparation suggests foreknowledge. Previous civilizations didn't simply vanish without warning. They saw the signs of impending collapse and took measures to preserve essential knowledge and selected populations. The survivors weren't just lucky refugees. They were chosen repositories of cultural memory, genetically and culturally adapted for the specific purpose of carrying civilization through the reset. The mechanisms of this preservation extend beyond genetics into cultural practices. Certain religious traditions, mathematical concepts, and architectural principles appear across cultures with no historical contact. These shared elements aren't evidence of common origins in our recent past. They're fragments of much older knowledge systems, carefully encoded in forms that could survive civilizational collapse. Sacred numbers, geometric ratios, and symbolic systems recur across supposedly independent cultures with mathematical precision. The same proportions appear in temple architecture from Egypt to Cambodia to Peru. Identical astronomical calculations emerge from Mayan codices and Babylonian tablets. These aren't coincidental discoveries. They represent pieces of a vast knowledge system that was deliberately fragmented and distributed to ensure its survival. The preservation strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of concentrating all knowledge in vulnerable institutions, the previous civilization scattered it across multiple carrier groups. Each fragment was embedded in religious practices, architectural traditions, and oral histories that would be faithfully transmitted across generations. The complete system could only be reconstructed by bringing together these scattered pieces. We're now living through that reconstruction process. Modern technology has given us the tools to analyze genetic patterns, decode astronomical alignments, and correlate geological evidence across global databases. For the first time since the last reset, we can see the complete picture of what came before. But this revelation comes with a terrible recognition. These same cycles that destroyed previous civilizations are manifesting again in our time. Climate instability, magnetic field fluctuations, increased volcanic activity, and rising sea levels mirror the conditions that preceded earlier collapses. The patterns suggest we're approaching another reset point. The question becomes whether our current civilization will suffer the same fate as its predecessors, or whether our growing awareness of the cycle will allow us to break free from it. The answer may depend on how quickly we can decode the warnings left by those who came before us. The warnings embedded in ancient monuments may be more urgent than we ever imagined. As we decode the astronomical alignments and mathematical relationships carved into stone across the globe, a disturbing timeline emerges. These structures weren't built to commemorate past achievements. They were constructed as countdown mechanisms, tracking celestial cycles that govern the rise and fall of civilizations. The precision of these calculations suggests the builders possessed detailed knowledge of Earth's orbital variations, solar cycles, and galactic positioning. They understood that our planet's journey through space follows predictable patterns that influence climate, magnetic fields, and cosmic radiation levels. More importantly, they recognize that these patterns create windows of vulnerability when civilizations become susceptible to catastrophic collapse. Modern astrophysics has begun to validate these ancient observations. We now know that our solar system oscillates through different regions of the galaxy, encountering varying levels of cosmic radiation and gravitational influences. These cycles operate on timescales of tens of thousands of years, far exceeding the attention span of any single civilization. Only a culture with institutional memory spanning multiple millennia could track such patterns effectively. The ancient architects encoded this knowledge using mathematical relationships that would survive the collapse of their civilization. The dimensions of pyramids, the spacing of megalithic circles, and the orientations of temple complexes all contain embedded information about these cosmic cycles. They created a distributed library written in stone, designed to be decoded by future civilizations sophisticated enough to understand its significance. What this celestial calendar reveals about our current position is deeply unsettling. Multiple independent calculation methods suggest we are approaching a convergence point where several destructive cycles align simultaneously. Solar minimum conditions, magnetic pole instability, and galactic positioning are creating a perfect storm of vulnerabilities that mirror previous collapse periods. The biological evidence supports this timeline. Genetic analysis of human populations reveals that our species has experienced severe bottlenecks, approximately every 12,000 years, reducing global populations to small surviving groups. These events don't follow gradual patterns of decline. They represent sudden, catastrophic reductions that eliminated the vast majority of existing civilizations within single generations. Archaeological evidence confirms the abrupt nature of these collapses. Excavation sites worldwide show clear demarcation layers where complex societies simply vanish from the record. Below these boundaries lie artifacts of sophisticated cultures. Above them, only simple tools and evidence of scattered survivors struggling to rebuild from fragmentary knowledge. The consistency of this pattern across continents and time periods indicates a global phenomenon beyond human control. These weren't political collapses or gradual environmental changes. They were planetary resets that operated according to natural cycles largely independent of human activity. But perhaps most significantly, the genetic markers associated with survival show increased activation in current populations. Dormant DNA sequences that helped previous groups endure civilizational collapse are becoming more active as environmental conditions begin to mirror those that originally shaped them. Our bodies are unconsciously preparing for another reset. This biological preparation manifests in subtle but measurable ways: enhanced stress tolerance, improved spatial navigation abilities, and heightened pattern recognition skills are appearing more frequently in younger generations. These aren't random evolutionary changes. They represent the activation of survival mechanisms encoded by populations that successfully navigated previous collapses. The implications extend beyond individual genetics to collective behavior. Human societies are unconsciously reorganizing themselves in ways that mirror the preparation strategies of previous civilizations. Urban populations are concentrating in geologically stable regions. Essential knowledge is being distributed across multiple platforms and storage systems. Cultural preservation efforts are intensifying despite the lack of obvious immediate threats. This unconscious preparation suggests that humanity retains deep institutional memory of previous collapses, even though conscious awareness has been suppressed. Our species carries biological and cultural programming designed to recognize approaching reset conditions and respond accordingly. The question becomes whether this unconscious preparation will be sufficient to navigate the coming transition. Previous civilizations possessed knowledge systems specifically designed for survival, yet 6 of them still succumb to the cyclical forces. Their failure suggests that awareness alone may not be enough to break free from the pattern. However, our current situation differs from previous cycles in several crucial ways. We possess global communication networks that allow rapid information sharing across all populations. We've developed technologies that operate independently of local infrastructure. Most importantly, we're beginning to consciously recognize the cyclical nature of civilizational collapse. This conscious awareness represents our greatest advantage and our most dangerous vulnerability. Knowledge of the cycle could allow us to prepare more effectively than previous civilizations. But it also carries the risk of social destabilization if the implications become widely understood before adequate preparation is complete. The scattered evidence suggests that previous civilizations faced this same dilemma. They possessed sufficient knowledge to recognize approaching resets, but lacked the technological means to prevent them. Their response was to encode warnings for future civilizations while implementing survival strategies for selected populations. We now find ourselves in the position of those future civilizations the warnings were intended to reach. The question is whether we will heed those warnings effectively or repeat the pattern of incomplete preparation that doomed our predecessors. The astronomical countdown embedded in ancient monuments continues to tick toward convergence. Environmental indicators align more closely with previous collapse conditions each passing year. Genetic activation patterns accelerate as our bodies respond to changing planetary conditions. This cycle that has reset human civilization 6 times before appears to be entering its final phase once again. Yet within this approaching darkness lies an unprecedented opportunity. Never before has a civilization possessed such detailed knowledge of the cycle while still having time to prepare. Never before have the tools existed to preserve and transmit essential information across a global reset. Never before has humanity stood at the threshold of either transcending the pattern or becoming its most well-documented victim. The choice between these outcomes may depend entirely on how quickly we can decode the remaining warnings left by those who walk this path before us, and whether we possess the wisdom to act upon that knowledge before the cycle completes itself once more. The evidence of these approaching convergences isn't hidden in obscure academic papers or classified government documents. It surrounds us in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of our daily experience. Yet most people remain oblivious to the signals because they've been conditioned to view them as separate, unrelated phenomena rather than components of a unified pattern. Consider the accelerating pace of technological development in recent decades. We're witnessing innovations that compress centuries of traditional progress into mere years. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, genetic engineering, and space exploration are advancing with unprecedented speed. This isn't the natural progression of human ingenuity. It's the unconscious rush of a species sensing the approach of another reset. Previous civilizations likely experienced similar technological surges before their collapse. The scattered artifacts we've discovered suggest they developed capabilities that we're only now rediscovering. Their final generations may have pushed the boundaries of knowledge with the same desperate urgency we see today, driven by an instinctive understanding that time was running short. This acceleration creates a paradox. The same technologies that might help us survive the coming reset also increase our vulnerability to it. Global communication networks that could preserve knowledge across the collapse also create dependencies that make societies more fragile. Energy systems that power our civilization also alter atmospheric conditions that influence the cyclical forces. We're simultaneously preparing for survival and hastening our own demise. The behavioral patterns emerging in modern populations mirror responses documented in the final phases of previous civilizations. Increasing social polarization, breakdown of traditional institutions, and the rise of apocalyptic thinking aren't signs of cultural decay. They're predictable responses to unconscious recognition of approaching transformation. Ancient texts describe similar periods of upheaval preceding each reset. Societies fragment as different groups pursue conflicting survival strategies. Some retreat into isolationism, others embrace radical change. Religious movements proliferate as people seek meaning in the face of inexplicable anxiety. These aren't random social pathologies. They're adaptive responses to environmental pressures that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. The economic systems of our current civilization also reflect unconscious preparation for collapse. The shift toward digital currencies, distributed networks, and knowledge-based economies represents an intuitive movement away from physical infrastructure that would be vulnerable during a reset. Simultaneously, the concentration of wealth among small elite groups mirrors the resource preservation strategies employed by previous civilizations, but perhaps the most revealing indicator lies in our collective obsession with preserving information. The explosion of digital archives, seed banks, cultural documentation projects, and space-based storage systems represents an unprecedented effort to safeguard human knowledge. We're unconsciously implementing the same preservation strategies that allowed fragments of previous civilizations to survive their resets. This preservation instinct operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Individual families create emergency supplies and backup plans without fully understanding why. Communities develop resilience networks and local food systems. Nations invest in underground facilities and distributed infrastructure. The entire species is preparing for discontinuity, even as official narratives maintain the illusion of endless progress. The most sophisticated preparation efforts remain hidden from public view. Deep underground facilities constructed under the guise of military necessity. Arctic seed vaults justified as agricultural insurance. Space-based archives disguised as scientific experiments. These projects represent the modern equivalent of the survival strategies that enabled selected groups to carry civilization through previous resets. The selection criteria for these preservation efforts likely mirror those used by previous civilizations. Genetic diversity, specialized knowledge, cultural memory, and geographic distribution all factor into determining which populations and information systems receive priority protection. The process isn't random or democratic. It follows patterns established over thousands of years of cyclical collapse and renewal. Yet our current situation differs fundamentally from previous cycles in one crucial respect. We possess the technological capability to potentially break free from the pattern entirely. Space-based colonies, artificial intelligence systems, and distributed networks could theoretically preserve civilization beyond the reach of planetary resets. We're approaching the first opportunity in human history to transcend the cycle, rather than simply survive it. This possibility introduces unprecedented variables into the ancient pattern. Previous resets operated on isolated planetary populations with limited technological capabilities. Our current civilization spans global networks and extends beyond Earth's atmosphere. The forces that destroyed earlier societies may not be sufficient to eliminate our distributed presence. However, this technological advantage also creates new vulnerabilities. Our interconnected systems could amplify collapse conditions rather than mitigate them. A solar flare that would have been merely inconvenient to previous civilizations could devastate our electronic infrastructure. Climate changes that earlier peoples could adapt to locally might overwhelm our globally integrated systems. The genetic activation patterns accelerating in current populations suggest our biological systems are preparing for traditional reset conditions. But these ancient survival mechanisms may not be adequate for the unique challenges of technological collapse. We're caught between evolutionary programming designed for primitive survival and contemporary vulnerabilities that transcend biological adaptation. The mathematical models embedded in ancient monuments couldn't account for variables that didn't exist during previous cycles. Their calculations assumed planetary resets would continue to operate according to established patterns. Our technological civilization represents an unprecedented deviation from historical norms, with consequences that extend beyond the scope of ancient predictions. This uncertainty places us in uncharted territory. We're simultaneously the most prepared and most vulnerable civilization in the cyclical sequence. Our awareness of the pattern provides advantages our predecessors lacked, while our technological dependencies create weaknesses they never faced. The outcome of this convergence will determine whether humanity transcends its cyclical limitations or becomes the most sophisticated civilization to succumb to them. The countdown continues its relentless progression toward convergence. Environmental indicators align more closely with reset conditions each passing month. Genetic activation patterns intensify as our bodies respond to changing planetary frequencies. Technological acceleration reaches levels that previous civilizations never achieved before their collapse. We stand balanced on the edge between transcendence and extinction, with the choice between outcomes still hanging in the balance. The signs that previous civilizations left for us weren't just warnings about the approaching reset. They were instructions for breaking free from the cycle entirely. The question remains whether we can decode and implement those instructions before the convergence reaches completion, or whether we'll join the archaeological record as the seventh civilization to rise and fall according to the ancient pattern. Pattern. The ancient instructions encoded in stone monuments across the globe point toward a solution that defies conventional thinking. These structures weren't just astronomical calculators or religious temples. They were components of a planetary communication network, designed to activate when cosmic conditions aligned with reset parameters. The builders understood something we're only beginning to grasp. Consciousness itself operates as a fundamental force capable of influencing physical reality. Modern quantum physics validates concepts that ancient civilizations apparently took for granted. Observer effect experiments demonstrate that conscious observation alters the behavior of subatomic particles. Quantum entanglement shows that separated particles maintain instantaneous connections regardless of distance. These phenomena suggest that consciousness operates outside the conventional boundaries of space and time. The mathematical relationships carved into megalithic sites encode instructions for accessing these quantum properties of awareness. Sacred geometric ratios, harmonic frequencies, and astronomical alignments weren't decorative elements. They were precise calibration tools for altering human consciousness to interface with planetary energy systems. The ancient architects were teaching future civilizations how to transcend physical limitations through coordinated conscious intention. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. Chambers within pyramids and stone circles show acoustic properties that induce specific brainwave patterns. The resonant frequencies generated by these structures synchronize human neural activity with Earth's electromagnetic field. Groups of individuals experiencing this synchronization could theoretically influence planetary systems through focused collective intention. This technology explains how previous civilizations might have attempted to break the reset cycle. Rather than relying solely on physical preparation, they developed methods for coordinating human consciousness on a global scale. Their failure suggests these efforts were incomplete or mistimed relative to the cosmic convergence patterns. Our current situation provides unprecedented advantages for implementing this consciousness-based solution. Global communication networks allow real-time coordination across all populations. Scientific instruments can monitor planetary conditions and optimal timing windows. Most importantly, our understanding of quantum mechanics provides a theoretical framework for effects that previous civilizations could only approach intuitively. The genetic activation patterns emerging in modern populations include enhanced neural connectivity in regions associated with collective consciousness experiences. These aren't random evolutionary changes. They represent the biological foundation for implementing the consciousness technology preserved in ancient monuments. Our brains are literally rewiring themselves to access capabilities our ancestors possessed before the last reset. Preliminary experiments in coordinated consciousness already demonstrate measurable effects on physical systems. Meditation groups focusing on specific intentions can influence random number generators, electromagnetic fields, and even seismic activity. These effects remain small-scale because current efforts lack the precision and coordination that ancient systems provided. The key lies in recreating the network effects that megalithic sites were designed to generate. When properly activated, these monuments function as amplification nodes of human consciousness, multiplying individual intentions into planetary-scale influences. The global distribution of these sites suggests they were positioned to create a coherent field encompassing the entire planet. Reactivating this network requires precise timing, aligned with astronomical conditions that occur only during reset convergences. The cosmic forces that threaten civilizational collapse also provide the energy necessary for consciousness-based intervention. This explains why the instructions were preserved for implementation during the approach to reset, rather than during stable periods. The window for this intervention appears to be opening now. Planetary magnetic field fluctuations, solar activity patterns, and galactic positioning align with parameters encoded in ancient calculations. Environmental conditions that activate the genetic markers in human populations also optimize the effectiveness of consciousness-based technologies. We're entering the brief period when breaking the cycle becomes physically possible. As we drift into sleep tonight, we carry with us the weight of this forbidden knowledge. The evidence lies scattered across our world like fragments of a shattered mirror, each piece reflecting the same impossible truth. We're not the first, and if the patterns hold, we may not be the last. Whether we become the civilization that finally breaks free from this ancient cycle, or simply another layer in Earth's archaeological record remains to be written. The choice rests not with institutions or governments, but with each awakening mind that dares to see beyond the carefully constructed illusion of linear progress. Sleep well, knowing that tomorrow we continue our search for answers in the ruins of forgotten worlds. Until we meet again in the darkness, may your dreams be filled with visions of what humanity might become when it finally remembers what it once was.